Sunny afternoon, getting on evening time. Tomorrow's Saturday, and I decided, wouldn't it be fun to make a really great homemade pumpkin pie for the holidays? But not just a common pumpkin pie. Grab your Libby's pumpkin and pour it in with some Eagle brand condensed milk, and add some sugar, a little bit of ginger, a little bit of nutmeg, a little bit of clove, stir it together and throw it into a baked pie shell. We can lift our game a little bit, and we can make our own crust too. And of all the things that keep people dickered up and confused when it comes to making pies, and I've made hundreds of pies, is making a good crust. And making a good crust is defined as a crust that's nice and baked on the bottom, and it doesn't have that unbaked sort of part where it's raw dough and you're eating that. One of the real secrets to having a great pie crust is something your mom and your grandma knew, and that is Crisco vegetable shortening. Okay, everybody thinks these days, the dairy industry and everybody convinced everybody that butter is so much healthier and so much better for making baked goods like pie crust and all that kind of stuff, that you know, if you're not using butter, you're killing yourself with shortening. The reality is you've been sold a bill of goods, because compared to butter, and I'm talking about the stick butter you buy in the store or in the containers, the spreadable, the Crisco all vegetable shortening has 50% less, yes, 50% less saturated fat than butter has, and in addition, no trans fat at all per serving. This stuff is amazing, and the world is gradually starting to rediscover shortening. I'm talking about vegetable shortening. You'll go to some Mexican markets and you'll see manteca large shortening. They use, you know, the Mexicans like to put that in a frying pan for deep frying and things like that. I like to use the all vegetable shortening here to make a great pie crust. So here's the plan. Tonight we're going to make the pie crust, and we're going to stick it in the refrigerator or probably the freezer overnight to sit in there and set real good. Then we're going to bake her tomorrow morning, and then make our filling, put it in, and let it stand there. So let's get started. Let's have some fun and learn how to make a good pie crust, okay? Okay, let's get that centered out. One of the first things I want to talk about is something called pie weights. One of the ways that you get a great crust on a pie, as opposed to the soggy one that's like that wet, nasty, uncooked dough, is that you use something that's called pie weights. They look like small ceramic marbles, very tiny, and these things can take a lot of heat without cracking and everything else. Once we make our pie shell shape, we want to then tomorrow morning pull it out of the freezer, our shaped pie, and then put some foil inside of that shaped pie, and then put our inside the crust, we're going to put some foil in there to keep it nice and sanitary. Then we're going to put either some beans, some dried beans, or pie weights in there to keep the shell from collapsing down when it hits the heat in the oven when we pre-bake it. If you don't use pie weights or something to keep the sides of the crust up, then when it hits the oven and you're baking your pie shell, all that Crisco shortening, or if you still insist on using butter, it's going to make that crust start to slide down into the pan that we use for baking the pie plate pan, and it's not going to have any crust on the side. So by putting some pie weights over top of the crust, on top of some aluminum foil, and then putting it in the oven, we keep that shell nice and upright from sliding down. If you don't have pie weights, a couple bags, 3 or 4 bags of dried large sized beans like lima beans or something like that will also, navy beans, a nice real hard bean will also do the trick in terms of filling up that crust and keeping that crust from sliding down as what we call blind baking. We're pre-baking that shell. so that we get it nice and flaky and done and not gooey and raw. Okay, pie weights, that's the key. Okay, welcome back. Let's talk about our ingredients. 2 cups of all-purpose flour in here in the big mixing bowl. We have our shortening, and what I want you to do is in 2 hours before you're ready to start making your pie crust, take a 1/2 cup of this stuff and put it in the 1/2 cup measure and put it in your freezer on a big tablespoon or something so you can easily get it out when it's frozen. Trying to work with room temperature shortening is not good. We're going to do the same trick like we do with the butter. We're going to use the cheese grater, and we're going to grate the frozen the shortening and a little bit of frozen butter in there for a little extra flavor into the bowl. With the flour, we're going to be using salt too. Got a little bit of salt. We're going to be using 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And we're going to also have, actually we're going to use a 1/2 teaspoon, and we have ice cold water. This is 34 degrees from my refrigerator. I got some really cold butter here also at about 34 degrees. So we're all set to go. Let's get the camera down here to ringside over top of the bowl, and let's make ourselves some pie crust, okay? Cup of shortening here that I actually put on a tablespoon and froze it in the freezer. I don't know if you can hear that. That is really hard as a rock, and that's going to grate up real good. Take your 1/2 teaspoon of salt and sprinkle it over top of your flour mix, and take your whisk, or if you don't have a whisk, use a spoon and mix this really thoroughly. Salt adds structure. I know you're tired of hearing me say that all the time. Next thing we want to do, while this is nice and cold, we want to grab this off with a spoon. Look at how nice that is to work with. And we want to start putting that through the box grater here. And what that's going to do is fall on top of the flour, just like we did with the butter before. Don't let it all come into a clump in one spot. Spread it out. And this works magnificently, and it helps when it's super cold and almost icy. That shortening will not stick to your hands, and it helps break it up into very small units there, which will help it spread out all evenly throughout the pie crust. And that's exactly what you want when you're making a pie dough, is you want an even distribution of the fats, because the fats are what gives the flakiness in the crust. Now you can reach inside, I have some in there, and pull it out, put it all down in there. And you can take your hands, coat that all good with flour so it sticks real good. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take a 1/2 stick of butter. This is 8 tablespoons here, and we're going to use 1/2 this stick, and we're going to grate this on top too, just like we did the other. Make sure to spread it all over the top. Don't let it clump in one spot. And that's about 1/2 of it right there. Reach inside, grab a little more, and what you want to do is take your hands and then start working that shortening and that flour into the dough until you have what looks like coarse meal, M-E-A-L, like a cornmeal or something like that. You want a coarse consistency to it, and because there's a lot of flour in here, this won't stick to your hands a lot. Don't worry about it. And it's also very cold. It's not melting yet. And you can see I'm working that in really, really well here. I like that. Some people pop a little ginger into the crust for a little more spice. We're going to keep it really simple here. And you can see how that's changing from being a flour to more like a coarse meal. And that's exactly what we want. Get all that flour worked in, and all that can almost hold together now. And that's what you want. Now we're going to take a very few, not many tablespoons, about 3. Start with about 2 tablespoons of ice cold water. Tablespoon 1, we're going to just move it around. Don't drop it in one place to saturate the flour and shortening and butter mix. Move it around. There's number 2 and there's number 3. And with 3 tablespoons in, I'll now take my hand and start working that in real good in there. And what I'm looking for is to get a consistency that it will form and hold a ball for rolling out. And remember that, don't overwork this or you'll melt the shortening and everything. Then you'll have a gooey mesh. You won't have a good structure for your pie crust, and it'll be gooey. So I think it needs about one more tablespoon of ice cold water to hold it together. And the ice cold water keeps it from melting the shortening, and that's important. The shortening in the butter, you don't want that to start to liquefy. And see how that's looking in there? Now I should be able to easily push that together in there and form a nice ball there. And look at that, that's exactly what I'm going to use to roll out. Gather all the dough there, and nothing could be easier. I've got no melted sugar, shortening or butter. Then I'm going to form this into a disc. And you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pop this disc in the bowl. Gather up all your stuff there, because you don't want too thin of a crust. You want a nice pastry crust there. And what I'm doing is I'm forming that into a disc. Don't start with a ball because it's too much for it to use the roller to bring it down, okay? Just like that. And what could be easier? Now I'm going to take this and I'm going to refrigerate this for about an hour. So I see in an hour and we'll roll it out. Good angle to work with here so you can see what I'm doing with the dough. I have the pie plate ready to go. It's a standard 9-inch. I have the dough that's all beautifully chilled, the pie dough. And what I want to do, I want to try to resist using flour. A lot of people use flour to roll things out, but then you get cracks develop in the crust, and the flour acts like an anti-adhesive that keeps it from coming together and holding its shape. So I like to spray the counter with a little bit of non-stick spray, and you can get this in commercial cooking stores. And then I like to put my disc down on it, and then take my rolling pin and begin rolling it out from the center outward, being careful to go to the edges too. And if it sticks a little bit, just spray your rolling pin a little bit with the non-stick spray and work that on good. And that resists getting the flour. It still sticks a little bit to it, but that's okay. And you want to just gradually start moving it too to shape it. And if you have to, if you worry that it's sticking too much, just take a spatula and that will keep it from sticking to the counter. Now when you have it about half the size that you want it to be, you can then take some flour and dust the counter with the flour. And then dust the rolling pin a little bit with the flour. Run it right through it and dust that too. Put it right over top of that. Turn it over one time. And that'll keep everything from sticking. And then using an even pressure, start to roll it out. Turn it 90 degrees. Roll it some more. Nice even pressure. Make sure it's not thicker at the edges than it is in the middle. If it starts to come apart, that's okay. Just push it together. There's very little flour on here. Push the dough together. Keep rolling it. And you'll see it's getting very elongated here. So what we want to do is get underneath of it. Use the spatula to scrape up a little. This is where a pastry cutter is real good. A pastry knife, pastry blade they call it. Put a little more flour on top to keep it from sticking, and then just continue to roll that out. You can always add some more flour, push it together. If she's starting to stick, don't hesitate to pick up a little more flour. Keep even pressure all the way to the ends. A lot of people have this tendency to make it thin in the middle, and then the edges are way too thick. Well, that's not what you want. Make sure to roll it 2 ways. Okay. Roll that out real good. And if it cracks, just push it together. It's okay. Keep rolling that out. What you want to do at the end of it is get it about 1/8 of an inch thick. And you can see now, relative to the size of the pie plate here, when I sit that there, that's almost what I need. I need about an extra inch. If you look down here, I need about an extra 1.5 inches around the perimeter to be able to form the fluted crust. Okay? So let's finish this up now. We sit our cam back down again. Not jigging it around too much. There we go. Okay, and that's starting to look pretty good. And I want to make sure all the edges, all the cracks, there's no cracks that are going to open up towards the middle. Then what I want to do is I want to grab my pastry cutter here, and I just want to go about 1 inch around the outside, 1.5 inches around the outside. Okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, just go about 1.5 inches around the outside, and then just pull that dough away, that excess dough, and then you're going to be able to make your fluted sort of edges for it. So remove that. Make sure you don't have any obvious cracks in it. Okay, and if you have any, just kind of take some of the dough and repair a few cracks on the edges. Okay, then what we're going to do is swiftly take our spatula and just get underneath of it. So when we go to roll it and lift it up, don't worry if you have 1 or 2 cracks. You just want to make sure it's basically free, and when you get it all up, you can just repair those cracks a little bit, and they'll hold together real good because you haven't over floured everything. And you can take a little more dough to sort of repair it there. Make sure your edges are real good. Make sure to fix any cracks on the edges. Add some more dough to the top if you need to, just so any cracks that you have are repaired. Okay? And that looks really good. Now the trick is going to be, we can't just flip this upside down and have it go into here. What we have to do is we have to have an intelligent way to sort of lift it up. And what we're going to do is actually take our rolling pin, and we're going to lift up the edge, and we're actually going to roll this and try to get it all on there. Don't worry if it comes apart a little bit. You can always sort of repair it up on the rolling pin, just like that. Don't worry if it comes off a little bit. And you can get underneath with the spatula if it starts to stick, just like that. And then you want to take your pie crust. You want to lift that up, and you want to drop that right in the pan like that. Don't worry if you have the cracks. Now's the time to take your dough, lift it up. That's why you have the excess dough, and go ahead, fix all the cracks around the side. A lot of people think, oh, I didn't get it up in one piece. Well, you don't want a real wet dough, or the wet dough won't have the crispiness to it. So look at the way I'm starting to form it. What you want to have is a little more thickness up here on the top when we go to fluted. So you can always add a little more of your excess dough. There's plenty of excess pie dough around here. Make sure you don't have any holes on the bottom. Okay. This is the no-fail way of having a nice crispy crust. And what you end up doing is using basically all the pie dough that you prepared, because you want a nice fluted top to it. And I always make sure to add quite a bit and work it in there And then we'll get the overhead cam and we'll show you how to make a nice fluted edge. But make sure you have plenty of thickness up here on the top. That's where the beauty part comes in. If you sense any spots that you think are a little thick, a little thin up here, you're going to have to add dough, or you're not going to have enough for making a nice sort of edging, what we call the fluting around here. And you can see now I really have the basic pie shape. I'm feeling around to make sure I don't have any spots that are going to be a little too skimpy on dough, because I want to make a nice edging on here. And you should theoretically be using all of this dough. And make sure if you see any exposed holes in the bottom, make sure to open them. Make sure to open them up. Okay, now what I want to do is take a fork and I want to prick this on the bottom. What that'll do will keep that rising up. Even though we're using pie weights and everything, it'll keep that from rising up. Now I'm going to put this to the side, and I'm going to put the overhead cam back on because I'm going to show you how to keep that. Okay, I have a little bit of my excess dough, and you can see how well that worked out. I don't have much left here. And what I want to do now is I want a nice even bottom. I want to take the bottom of a cup and I want to flatten that to get some evenness, because that'll bake evenly, as opposed to having a spot that may be a little too thick or a little too thin. So press that down good and work that all into there, and then work the sides so you sort of get some uniformity along the sides. I'm just pressing in. I got a nice beveled side to this cup, and I'm just pressing in and making sure that dough is all worked into the sides, just like that. Okay, and I will take my fork again and make sure it's pricked good. That'll keep it from rising up when it hits the heat. Now for making the fluting, what you want to do is take your fingers like this in this hand, and you want to take your thumb in this hand, and you just want to push that together. Just like that. You don't want to rise it up, you just want to hold it in position. And just sort of press in. You see the way I'm working that in? Like that. And how wonderful that's going to be. And you're just about done for the day. And if it comes out of position a little bit, so what? Hit it again. Do it. And go around the whole perimeter like that. And you can make it as deep and sharp looking as you want. I don't need it crazy all the way out there. If you got a little too much dough, just remove some. So all I did, just clean that up a little bit. Remove some of the dough. Just like that. And that's exactly the way we want to flute it. But we want to make sure that this holds its shape tomorrow, because people eat with their eyes. So you can see how nicely that looks now. That's a standard pie crust that's been fluted. Now the trick is, just like this, we want to put it in the freezer like this overnight. Then tomorrow we'll pull it out, and after a couple minutes, even if this is a Pyrex dish, a Pyrex glass pan here, we can put this right in the oven, put our pie weights and our foil, and it'll be so frozen there won't be any problem with holding shape or anything like that when it hits the oven. And this will freeze, it'll seize the shape, and the heat will grab it and hold the shape before the fats can melt and make it lose its shape. Pretty nice, huh? It's going to go in the freezer. We'll see you tomorrow for Naughty Nighty Cooking, the homemade pumpkin pie.